Well, my dear friends, this place right here is the absolute best candidate for where the trial of Jesus took place, okay?
Minutes ago, explorers found lost letters of the shocking death of Pontius Pilate, the man who ordered the crucifixion of Jesus, which stunned everyone. The Roman governor of Judea found himself in a dire situation as he decided the fate of Jesus, despite finding him blameless.
We've been looking at that limit story for 2,000 years, in the image and in the story. What are we doing?
But what if the dark events that followed were a sign of something more terrifying lurking in his future? Step into the chilling final moments of a man tormented by the weight of his ultimate decision. Pontius Pilate in the shadow of the cross. In the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we see how Pilate hesitated during his interactions with him. He even tried to avoid making the final decision by offering to release a prisoner, which was a tradition during Passover. But instead of choosing him, the crowd picked Barabbas, a criminal, as told in Matthew chapter 27. The governor, feeling he had no other choice, gave in to the crowd's demands. He washed his hands in front of them to show he wasn't taking responsibility for his death, trying to free himself from the guilt of what was about to happen. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Jerusalem, a sense of foreboding silence swept through the city. The decision was made, and yet, the air hung heavy with the unspoken question. What consequences would follow this fateful choice?
It's the Jews who organize and manipulate the trial so that Jesus dies. The Romans are the unwilling participants who never want to see this, who would stop it if they could. This is completely spurious history.
In the depths of the night, a distant rumble echoed, hinting at the looming storm that would change the course of history forever. Things took a strange turn when Claudia, Pilate's wife, sent him a message. She had a disturbing dream and warned him not to harm the righteous man. This part of the story, found only in the Gospel of Matthew, adds a mysterious element, hinting that maybe there were bigger, even supernatural forces involved in the events leading up to his death. As Pilate went ahead and ordered the crucifixion, a sign was placed above him on the cross saying, "King of the Jews," in 3 languages. This was done to explain why he was being crucified, as someone who claimed to be a king and was therefore seen as a rebel against Rome. It also shows Pilate's inner struggle, trying to keep control while facing pressures from all sides. His story is filled with political struggles, personal dilemmas, and historical importance. It paints a picture of a man who, despite his power, was influenced by the chaotic events around him. His decision, seen as a great injustice in the Christian story, continues to be discussed and interpreted today. The exact details of his death are unclear. Some say he might have taken his own life out of despair. Regardless, his story shows how one's life can change completely due to a single moment in history, leaving behind a legacy filled with controversy and mystery. Christian tradition offers different stories about his death, with some saying he became a Christian before he died. One popular story from the Middle Ages, found in the Golden Legend, claims he took his own life while he was in exile in France, and his body was thrown into a river. No matter the story, his death is often seen as a sad end for a man who played a key role in the crucifixion of Jesus. These different accounts blend history, tradition, and guesswork, showing just how complicated his story is in people's memory. Over the years, his story has been used to explore themes like guilt, forgiveness, and justice. If he did take his life, it's often seen as a sign of deep regret and hopelessness. On the other hand, stories of him converting to Christianity suggest he was searching for forgiveness. These stories show how hard it can be to separate fact from fiction when we look at people involved in such important religious events. Pilate is often seen as a weak figure in Christian history, someone who didn't have the courage to stand up for what he believed in.
It poisons the minds of ordinary people who see in their Jewish neighbors, so many centuries afterwards, the killers of Jesus in first century Jerusalem.
His life and death remind us of the lasting impact our choices can have, especially when we give in to outside pressure. In the Gospels, he is shown as a governor who knew Jesus was innocent but gave in to the crowd's demands anyway. He is often compared to other historical figures who face similar moral challenges. His story is used to show the importance of courage in standing up for what's right. During Holy Week, Christians remember him as an example of how giving in to fear and injustice can lead to terrible consequences. His tragic story also sparks deep religious thought, reminding us of human weakness. Standing before Jesus, he failed to see the truth, showing how easy it is for people to make mistakes. But the real challenge comes when we look at our own lives. His story pushes us to think about our decisions and the bravery it takes to stick to what's right. Religious thinkers have debated his role in the story of Christ's passion for centuries, using his actions as a way to explore the tension between justice and convenience. His famous act of washing his hands, trying to avoid blame, is often seen as a symbol of a guilty conscience. In sermons, he is a reminder of the need for moral courage. His story encourages us to act with integrity, even when it's hard or comes at a personal cost. In Christian teaching, he represents the ongoing battle between good and evil, and his failure to stand up for the truth serves as a warning against letting our morals slide. These portrayals emphasize his lasting influence in history and theology. His character is also a key part of Easter plays around the world, where his role is reinterpreted in new ways that reflect changing societal values. The ongoing re-examination of his story shows that his life still matters today when we talk about power, morality, and the consequences of our choices. The story of Pontius Pilate plays an important role in Christian beliefs, encouraging deep thought about the choices we make and the responsibilities we hold in society. He is a figure whose life and death still stir strong emotions and lessons in Christian teachings. His part in Jesus' execution is key to understanding Christian ideas about sacrifice and redemption. This lasting influence shows how important his decisions were and the lessons that continue to come from his story. His role is often discussed in education when talking about themes like responsibility and moral courage. His story is a clear reminder of how power can lead to tough moral decisions and even bad outcomes if people don't have the courage to do what's right. It pushes us to think about our own actions and the ethical duties we have, especially when faced with difficult situations. His story teaches us to always seek truth and justice, highlighting the life-changing power of forgiveness and redemption. As we turn the page to the next chapter, we continue to explore the profound ripple effects of that pivotal moment in history. The story of Pontius Pilate. As the Roman governor who allowed Jesus to be crucified, he is a symbol of authority, regret, and moral struggle. Looking at his life encourages us to think about the importance of making fair decisions and facing the truth, no matter how hard it is. His story serves as a constant warning that our choices have lasting consequences, reminding us to always prioritize justice and truth. His legacy reflects our own struggles with moral and ethical choices, urging us to act with integrity and courage in everything we do. But that's not the only lesson we can learn here. When we reflect on his story, it also encourages us to think deeply about the impact of our decisions, both now and in the future. It reminds us how important it is to search for the truth, even when it's unpopular or difficult. His lasting place in history serves as a powerful reminder of just how crucial justice and truth are in our lives. By looking at his actions and life, we are inspired to act with fairness and honesty, no matter what pressures we face. His story is not just a historical or religious tale. It also opens up a bigger understanding of the political and social issues of his time. This wider look helps us fully appreciate the complexity of his choices and how they have had such a big impact on history and moral teaching. But that's not where it ends.
And so I think that there, if anything, there is within this script a lot of those kind of subtleties that make it.
His story continues to teach us about the challenges of leadership and the importance of standing up for what's right, no matter how difficult it may seem. Keeping peace in places like Judea was like walking a tightrope. It required careful balancing because showing any sign of weakness could lead enemies of Rome to take advantage. He found himself in a very tricky situation where every decision he made could cause serious problems, both politically and socially. As he was overseeing the trial, his wife Claudia had a troubling dream. Worried, she sent him a message telling him to avoid condemning this just man. This story, only mentioned in the Gospel of Matthew, adds a mysterious twist, suggesting that something beyond human control might have been trying to stop the crucifixion. Though Claudia isn't mentioned much in the Bible, her warning plays a big role in the story, highlighting her husband's moral dilemma. She saw her dream as a message from a higher power, warning him of the consequences. By ignoring her, it seemed that he was setting himself up for a lifetime of regret. As time passed, many Christian traditions honored Claudia, seeing her as a key figure in the final days. Her vision hinted that divine forces were influencing the events, even though the man on trial was still sentenced to death. He ordered the sign above the cross, calling him Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek, which many saw as an accusation of treason against Caesar. His conscience was heavy, and he felt trapped by the pressure from the crowd and the religious leaders. The words asking for forgiveness for those who persecuted him seemed to haunt him.
I could see everybody. There were about 350 people that were around me on a hill. And the wind was blowing, and then I couldn't hear the wind.
The Bible doesn't go into much detail about his feelings after the crucifixion, but it's easy to imagine that he was burdened by guilt. Some Christian stories say he never recovered from his role in the death. There are even writings, especially from the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, suggesting that he may have turned to Christianity later, seeking redemption. However, this idea remains just a theory. The situation only got worse for him after the resurrection. When the guards at the tomb reported that he had risen, he tried to cover it up. He bribed them to say that the body had been stolen. But the news of the resurrection spread quickly, and it became the foundation of Christian belief, as told in the Gospels and Epistles. If the resurrection was true, it would mean that the man who had been condemned was who he said he was, making his judgment a terrible mistake. His attempts to hide the truth showed how desperate he was to keep his authority, even though these events were beyond anything he could control. But this wasn't the end of his troubles. As Christianity grew and more people converted, the impact of his choices became even more significant. Rome's power was being challenged by this new spiritual movement. Eventually, word of all these events reached Emperor Tiberius, and he found himself in a dangerous position. He was already known for being a harsh ruler, and now his handling of Jesus' trial added to the accusations of poor governance, as recorded by historians like Flavius Josephus and Philo of Alexandria. When the Jewish community strongly objected, things got much worse for him. He was called back to Rome to explain his actions after a violent event on Mount Gerizim, where many Samaritans were eliminated. Because of this and his overall poor handling of things, he lost his position.
Is actually going to do far more in spreading the gospel than just standing there and preaching.
Lucius Vitellius, the governor of Syria, sent him back to Rome for a closer look at his actions. He faced a full investigation, and his political career ended. The consequences of what he did in Judea were big, affecting both him and the area he controlled. His downfall shows how hard it was for Roman rulers to keep control in provinces where local traditions and desires for freedom clashed with Roman rule. In Rome, he went through a deep investigation. Emperor Tiberius was very angry about the mess created in Judea. His enemies took advantage of this moment to ruin him. He was removed from his position and sent into exile. Meanwhile, his wife, Claudia, was tormented by disturbing dreams, and he himself, filled with regret, lived in isolation. It is believed he never faced a formal trial, but was simply forced to step away from public life. There are some unofficial stories, like the Acts of Pilate, that give different views of his life after the crucifixion of Jesus, often filled with guilt and a search for redemption. Carrying forward the themes of justice and truth, we step into the next chapter, ready to uncover more about the profound impact of leadership choices throughout history. A study of guilt, power, and historical ambiguity. The details of Pilate's death are uncertain, with different stories telling different endings. His life shows how much his decisions affected both his fate and history itself. The investigation in Rome likely focused on how he failed to keep peace and showed his lack of good leadership, highlighting the tricky balance of power and politics in the Roman Empire. Once a person with significant authority, he ended up completely powerless, spending his last days in disgrace and loneliness. a sharp contrast for someone who had tried to hold on to his position with questionable actions. Some historical accounts suggest that Pontius Pilate took his own life, overwhelmed by guilt in the shame of his exile. Eusebius of Caesarea, a prominent church historian from the 4th century, wrote that Pilate committed suicide during the reign of the Roman Emperor Caligula. Other sources, however, provide less clarity regarding the exact circumstances of his death. In addition to these accounts, there are Christian traditions that claim Pilate may have converted to Christianity before his demise. Medieval and Renaissance writings, such as the Golden Legend, frequently depict Pilate taking his own life while in exile in Gaul, where his body was allegedly thrown into a river. These various versions of his death contribute to the ongoing debate surrounding his final days. But that's not the whole story. His death is often seen as a sad end for a man involved in such a significant moment in history, the crucifixion of Jesus. The mix of history, tradition, and guesswork around his death highlights just how complex his character has become in people's minds over the centuries. His story has been used to explore themes like guilt, redemption, and justice. If his suicide is true, it is viewed as the ultimate act of despair and regret. Yet stories of his conversion suggest he may have been seeking forgiveness.
That was a deterrent from the devil to keep you from doing this?
Sure. On the way up the hill, he said, "You're a dead man."
These various accounts show just how difficult it is to separate fact from legend when it comes to historical figures tied to major religious and moral events. Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, is remembered in many stories and artworks because of his deep internal struggle and his important part in the crucifixion. Over time, from old religious paintings to modern books, how people see him has changed, reflecting society's shifting views. In famous works like José Saramago's The Gospel According to Jesus Christ and Mikhail Bulgakov's The Master and Margarita, he is shown as a complicated character, torn between his duty as a governor and his own sense of right and wrong. In art, he is often shown during the serious moment when he sentences Jesus, with his expression switching between doubt and giving in. These images highlight how his story still matters today, both historically and in terms of religion. He also shows up in Easter plays around the world, where different interpretations of his role reflect how society continues to change. This constant reevaluation of his character shows how his story remains relevant, especially when talking about authority, morality, and the consequences of human choices.
A path of emulating evil in order to represent it. Now, you said that you turned to God, so to speak, to protect yourself against false representations of evil, but also in some ways to shield yourself.
But this isn't the worst part. His story is more than just a historical event. It's a powerful lesson about the struggles of leadership and making hard decisions. His actions and his failure to act, such as hesitating to stand up for truth and justice, keep his story alive. His mention in Christian prayers and his role in the Passion of Christ ensures that he stays at the center of Christian teachings, used as an example of moral responsibility and ethical behavior. His story represents the tragic outcomes of giving in to fear and making questionable moral choices. It offers a way to think about judgment and human mistakes, showing how complex his decisions really were. His involvement in the crucifixion isn't just a historical fact, but also serves as a key lesson in ethics and leadership. His story reminds us of the importance of acting with honesty and courage, showing how our choices can have lasting effects. And yet, there's more to consider. His life, filled with power, guilt, and regret, makes us think about what it means to be a fair leader and the bravery needed to stand by the truth, no matter how difficult. His legacy as a tragic figure continues to inspire and warn us, using his part in the Christian story to talk about sin, forgiveness, and justice. His story encourages us to reflect on our own roles in society and our responsibilities, pushing us to make decisions that are right no matter the pressure.
And what started as a very small movement based around Jerusalem has now spread across the empire.
In the end, his story reminds us how crucial it is to seek justice and truth, even when faced with overwhelming pressure or uncertainty. His journey reflects the struggle between power and conscience, highlighting the consequences of indifference and moral compromise. Yet it also serves as a profound reminder of the transformative power of redemption and forgiveness, offering a mirror for us to confront our own ethical dilemmas and moral challenges. His story urges us to reflect on our actions and decisions, prompting a deeper consideration of accountability, integrity, and the lasting impact of our choices. The letter from Claudia, the wife of Pontius Pilate, provides a startling first-hand account of Jesus' trial and crucifixion. Written after a chilling dream, Claudia detailed these events in a letter that was later found near the Dead Sea Scrolls. This rare document, currently preserved in an Italian library, was addressed to her friend, Fulvia Romelia. What secrets and insights could this letter reveal about that pivotal moment in history? Join us as we explore the hidden truths within Claudia's words and uncover the mysteries of that fateful time. Claudia's life with Pontius Pilate. Claudia, the wife of Pontius Pilate, shares her life story with a close friend, weaving through the memories of her past, marked by significant changes and personal challenges. She recalls her peaceful childhood in Hebron, surrounded by the comfort of her parents and the familiar beauty of her hometown. At the young age of 16, her life took a dramatic turn as she married Pontius Pilate, a distinguished man from a prominent Roman family who was much older than she. This marriage brought her out of the serene environment of her youth and into the responsibilities and complexities of being married to a Roman governor. As she adjusted to her new role, Claudia found joy in motherhood, cherishing her son more than anything else in her life. Her days were a mix of personal moments with her son and the demands of her husband's political career. When Pilate received the appointment to become the procurator of Judea, thanks to the emperor's decision, they moved to this new vibrant region. Despite the high regard many held for them in Jerusalem, Claudia couldn't help but miss the quiet and beautiful settings of Hebron, the place where she grew up among statues and groves that she dearly loved. Life in Judea wasn't easy. Claudia sought refuge and peace in the local forests, a place where she could escape and engage in quiet activities like sewing and reading poetry by Virgil, which brought her comfort. Meanwhile, Pilate faced considerable challenges in his role. His governance was often tested by the local population, who deeply resented Roman rule. The Hebrews saw the Romans as invaders, believing that their presence defiled the sacred land that they considered divinely granted to them. Claudia's recounting of these experiences also delves into the turbulent periods surrounding the trial and crucifixion of Jesus, highlighting a time of intense social strife and personal conflict. Pilate found himself in a precarious position, trying to appease the powerful Roman authorities while dealing with an embittered populace. The local groups, though diverse and often conflicting, were united in their deep opposition to Roman domination. Claudia describes how these pressures influenced Pilate's decisions and the overall atmosphere in Judea, painting a vivid picture of the challenges they faced together. Through her narrative, she offers a personal glimpse into the struggles of navigating life tied to historical events that shaped their lives and the broader Roman Empire. In the social circles of Jerusalem, only one family truly welcomed Claudia with open arms. This was the family of Jairus, who held a respected position as the director of the synagogue. His wife Salome was known for her warmth and kindness, not just to her own family, but also towards others, like Claudia. They had a daughter, Semita, a 12-year-old girl with a cheerful presence and bright, fair curls that reminded Claudia of the dawn over Sharon. During Claudia's visits, they would often talk about their faith, sharing stories and readings from their holy books, enriching Claudia's understanding of their beliefs. These visits were a highlight for Claudia. She was particularly moved by hymns credited to Solomon, which praised the God of Jacob for his eternal and all-encompassing nature. Semita, with a voice as delicate as a harp, would sing these hymns beautifully, filling the air with a peaceful, almost sacred feeling. Back at her own home, Claudia often found herself drawn to these spiritual experiences, especially when she felt isolated. She would try to recreate the serenity by singing to her son and even praying, despite her initial reluctance, finding a surprising comfort in the act. Tragically, this peaceful period was disrupted when Semita fell severely ill. The news of her illness shook Claudia deeply, and she was devastated when she learned of Semita's death early one morning. Determined to be there for Salome, Claudia quickly went to their home, her child in tow, but found her way barred by a crowd of mourners who had come to pay their respects. After a painful loss, Claudia gets caught up in a moment that is hard to understand, making her question everything she once believed. A surprising encounter in Jerusalem. As Claudia tried to navigate through the crowd, a pathway cleared for a group of modestly dressed men. Among them was Jairus, who, instead of the sorrow Claudia expected, had a look of hope that confused her. Leading the group was a young man dressed as humbly as the others, but there was something about him that made Claudia pause. His presence was so overwhelming that she found herself having to look away, as if his very being was too much for her eyes. This young man, with his commanding aura, followed by Jairus, approached the house. Claudia, driven by a mix of fear and intrigue, followed them inside without their notice. There, Samita lay as though she was merely sleeping, her beauty not dimmed by the shadow of death, surrounded by candlesticks and the scent of perfumes. Her mother Salim stood by, seemingly frozen by grief and barely acknowledging Claudia's presence. The atmosphere was heavy with sorrow until Jairus, full of hope, addressed the young man, showing him his daughter and expressing a desperate plea for her return to life. The man's response was simple yet powerful. He spoke to Samita, commanding her to rise. In a moment that felt like a breath held in collective anticipation, Samita obeyed. She sat up, her eyes opening, and a gentle smile spreading across her face as she reached out to her mother. The room erupted with emotions as mother and daughter reunited in a tearful embrace, while Jairus, overcome with gratitude, fell to the man's feet, thanking him profusely. Jairus then asked the man how one could achieve eternal life, to which he replied with a profound simplicity, advising Jairus to love both God and his fellow men. With those words, he departed as quietly as he had appeared, leaving behind a stunned and newly hopeful crowd. Claudia, having witnessed this extraordinary event, found herself profoundly changed. The experience not only deepened her respect for the beliefs of her friends, but also left her with a sense of wonder and a newfound hope that perhaps there was something truly divine at work in the world. She carried this feeling back to her own home, sharing the story with her son and others, pondering the profound simplicity of the message she had heard, to love. As days turned into weeks, Claudia continued to reflect on these events. She often found herself revisiting the words of the hymns she had learned from Samita and Salome, finding in them a greater depth and a new source of comfort during times of solitude. The teachings that once seemed foreign to her now resonated deeply, offering her guidance and a peaceful refuge from the complexities of her life in Jerusalem. Claudia's narrative is more than just a recounting of events. It's a testimony to the transformative power of kindness, faith, and miraculous happenings. Her story serves as a bridge between different cultures and beliefs, illustrating how shared human experiences can bring people together, fostering understanding and compassion among those who might otherwise remain divided by their differences. This recounting not only enriches Claudia's life, but also offers a timeless reminder of the importance of openness to change and the value of deep, compassionate connections. Her path through moments of solitude, spiritual discovery, and witnessing miraculous events highlights the profound impact such relationships can have, changing one's perspective and, in some ways, one's destiny. Claudia found herself kneeling, confused and overwhelmed, as if she had just snapped out of a strange dream. Slowly, she made her way back to her home, leaving behind a scene filled with an indescribable joy that lingered in the air. That evening, while having dinner, Claudia shared with her husband, Pontius Pilate, everything she had witnessed. Pontius listened intently and then explained that she had seen Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was increasingly disliked by several influential groups in Jerusalem, like the Pharisees, Sadducees, followers of Herod, and the high-ranking Levites of the temple. Their dislike for Jesus was intensifying each day, with their minds fixated on plotting his demise. Despite their growing dislike, Pontius acknowledged the wisdom of Jesus' teachings and the divine nature of his acts. With tensions growing in Jerusalem, Claudia starts to feel the rising threat around a man whose teachings bring both hope and fear, understanding the tensions around Jesus. Curious about the deep resentment toward Jesus, Claudia asked why he was so disliked. Pontius explained that Jesus openly criticized their double standards and moral failures, often using harsh comparisons like calling them whited sepulchres and brood of vipers. He accused them of burdening others with demands they themselves wouldn't bear. These harsh truths angered the self-righteous leaders, casting a bleak outlook on Jesus' future. Moved by the discussion, Claudia implored Pontius to intervene and protect Jesus. However, Pontius expressed his feeling of helplessness against the strong and corrupt forces at play, worried about the dire consequences of standing up to them, especially if it involved harming such a wise man. After sharing these heavy thoughts, Pontius left the room to ponder alone, while Claudia remained, her heart heavy with worry and sorrow. As the important festival of Passover drew near, a significant and sacred time for the Hebrew people, Jerusalem swelled with visitors from all around. This was a time when many came to participate in the solemn rituals. During this time, Pontius confided in Claudia about the dangerous uncertainty surrounding Jesus. He mentioned a conspiracy that might result in Jesus being handed over to the high priest that very evening. Hearing this, Claudia was shaken and once again pleaded with Pontius to safeguard Jesus. Pontius, with a look of sadness, hinted at the tragic fate that often befell righteous men, as foretold by philosophers like Plato. Persecution, disdain, and a brutal death seemed destined for Jesus. That night, as Claudia attempted to sleep, a vivid and striking vision overtook her. She envisioned Jesus in a divine form, radiant and commanding, surrounded by celestial beings and executing divine orders. In her vision, Jesus divided the just from the unjust with a simple gesture. The just were lifted towards eternal bliss, while the unjust were cast into a fiery pit, more terrifying than the deepest underworld realms described in ancient tales. During this celestial judgment, Jesus displayed the scars of his sacrifices and demanded justice for the blood he had shed for humanity. The doomed souls, now desperate, sought refuge, but found none. Their false sense of security now shattered, they faced their grim fate. As dawn broke, bringing light to the temple rooftops, Claudia arose, her heart filled with dread from the night's visions. In an attempt to calm her nerves, she sat by the window. Yet peace eluded her as sounds of an angry mob echoed from the city center. The shouts grew louder and closer, sounding like the relentless crashing of ocean waves. With her heart pounding, Claudia quickly dressed her son for the chill and hurried to find Pontius. When they reached the doorway to the court hall, the uproar intensified. Overwhelmed by anxiety, Claudia could not bring herself to enter. Instead, she peeked through the curtains, glimpsing the escalating turmoil. Claudia observed intently as Pontius Pilate sat confidently on his lavish ivory throne, embodying the grandeur that Rome bestowed upon its representatives. Despite his composed exterior, Claudia could discern his underlying anxiety. In stark contrast to Pontius's regal demeanor, Jesus of Nazareth stood before him, bound and battered. His garments were torn from the physical abuse he had endured, and his forehead was smeared with blood. Yet his demeanor was calm and undisturbed, displaying none of the bitterness or fear one might expect, his tranquility reminiscent of an innocent lamb. This serene composure deeply unnerved Claudia, especially as she remembered the haunting plea from her dream, calling for the return of his blood. The atmosphere was charged with tension as a furious crowd encircled Jesus. Among them were guards, servants, Levites, and Pharisees, their eyes radiating intense anger. The Pharisees were particularly noticeable, with scrolls containing laws tied around their heads. The anger and jealousy from the crowd were palpable, their faces seemingly illuminated by a sinister glow as if fueled by an infernal fire. Their collective voices merged into a cacophony resembling the howls of hunted animals. A moment of silence ensued as Pontius gestured for quiet. He then addressed the crowd, inquiring about their demands. Speaking on behalf of the masses, a priest demanded Jesus' death, explaining that Herod had sent Jesus to Pilate for judgment. The accusations against Jesus were severe. He was charged with predicting the destruction of the temple, claiming himself as the King of the Jews, the Christ, and the Son of God. These proclamations had deeply offended the religious leaders. Their unanimous cry for his crucifixion resonated loudly, an echo that Claudia would find impossible to forget. Just as the image of Jesus, the picture of innocent suffering, would forever haunt her. As the crowd's anger grows, Claudia's worries reach a breaking point, leading her to a moment that would test faith, power, and sacrifice. The pressure mounts on Pontius Pilate. Pontius then directly questioned Jesus, asking if he indeed considered himself the King of the Jews and the Son of God. Jesus' responses were brief, but the crowd's reaction was not. Their shouts intensified, their voices harsh and desperate, like those of wild, hungry animals demanding Jesus' crucifixion. Despite Pontius's assertion of Jesus' innocence and his lack of guilt, the crowd's cries only grew more vehement. Overwhelmed by the chaos, Claudia discreetly signaled for a servant to fetch Pontius, urging him to momentarily leave the tumult. When Pontius approached her, Claudia, overcome with a rush of emotions, pleaded with him. She invoked their child and their sacred marriage vows, begging him not to partake in the shedding of innocent blood. She recounted her dream where Jesus appeared enveloped in divine majesty, judging humanity, and warned of the severe repercussions if Pontius were to harm such a celestial figure. Despite expressing his own fears, Pontius felt his hands were tied. He suggested that Claudia take their child and retreat to the garden, away from the distressing scene, leaving her to weep alone in her despair. Meanwhile, back at the tribunal, Jesus continued to endure mockery and brutality at the hands of the crowd and the rough soldiers. Their fury seemed to be fueled further by his boundless patience. When Pontius returned to his throne, he was met with the relentless demands of the crowd, shouting for Jesus' death. Attempting to find a peaceful resolution, Pontius resorted to an old tradition, offering to pardon a prisoner as a gesture of mercy for the Easter festival. He presented the crowd with a choice between Jesus and Barabbas, a notorious criminal known for robbery and other crimes. Contrary to Pontius's hopes, the crowd chose to free Barabbas, sealing Jesus' fate. Despite Pontius's efforts to reason with them, asking what wrong Jesus had committed, the crowd's response was ferocious, insisting on crucifixion. Faced with their unyielding stance, Pontius felt a deep sense of despair. He recognized the limitations of his power, as his authority and the might of Rome appeared insufficient against the vehement outcry in Jerusalem. His predicament was stark, with only his personal guard and a small contingent of local troops who had sworn loyalty to the Roman eagle by his side. As the tension rose, the defiance of the crowd became more aggressive. Pontius Pilate, tasked with maintaining Roman order, felt his authority slipping away as the loud calls for Jesus' execution intensified. The noise never died down. Instead, it swelled, becoming more threatening by the minute. Surrounded by an angry mob, Pontius found himself with minimal backup, relying only on his personal guards and the few Roman soldiers in Jerusalem. This period highlighted the harsh realities of leadership under immense pressure. The scene unfolding in Jerusalem was not just a simple decision about one man's fate, but a complex interaction between Roman occupiers and the local Jewish leadership and their followers. The clash was loud and chaotic, filled with deep religious and political strife. Pontius faced a torrent of competing pressures: the vocal demands of the crowd, the stringent requirements of Roman law, and his personal sense of right and wrong all clashed loudly around him. The governor's struggle was emblematic of the broader challenges faced by Roman rulers in foreign territories. They had to constantly balance their empire's laws with the local customs and sentiments, navigating through a maze of local resistance and the expectations of Roman governance. This particular day in Jerusalem was a stark example of how quickly tensions could escalate and how decisions could have far-reaching implications for all involved. As the shouts for crucifixion grew louder, Pontius had to weigh his options carefully. The local population was clearly agitated, and their anger could not be easily dismissed. The Roman approach to governance typically involved a certain level of negotiation and adaptation to local traditions, but it also required the upholding of Roman authority and law. In this case, the crowd's demand for Jesus' death put Pontius in a precarious position, challenging his ability to enforce Roman law while also managing local discontent. Pontius's decision to ultimately give in to the crowd's demands was a critical moment that demonstrated the delicate act of balancing justice with mercy, power with restraint. Could Claudia's letter simply be a legend, or does it reveal things that have been kept hidden for centuries? What might it say about the true events of Jesus' trial and crucifixion? Share your thoughts, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.